The shortest distance between two people is a laugh. We cannot laugh at perfect people because perfect people are not funny. When you're on aeroplanes, do you send notes up to the pilot suggesting how he should be flying it? If you don't know about writing, don't give people notes. The great problem about God is, how is it possible for someone who is all good and all wise and all knowing to produce a world in which there is evil?
Hi, I'm Dr. Sadhna and this is Leader Voices, a show about leaders and their infinite ability to change the world. Hello, I'm Dr. Sadhna and welcome to a very special episode of Leader Voices. As a young girl in England, I remember there was only one show on TV. That show, Monty Python's Flying Circus, shook the nation and the world, and is widely regarded as one of the most groundbreaking comedy shows ever made. The show starred some of comedy's greatest talents, including Terry Gilliam, Eric Idle, Terry Jones, Michael Palin, Graham Chapman, and the legendary John Cleese.
I'm the only legendary one, you know. Right?
I am incredibly fortunate today to have the opportunity to speak with not one, but with two very funny Cleeses. Camilla Cleese, daughter of John, who's a prolific stand-up comedian who's appeared on countless stages, multiple festivals, and venues across the globe. Her father, John Cleese, who's a founding member of Monty Python and has appeared in such classics as Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Life of Brian, The Meaning of Life, Fawlty Towers, and you may have seen him in a couple small indie films, including Shrek, James Bond, and Harry Potter.
And Pink Panther 2.
She always teases me about that because it was so awful. She always puts that in.
That's how I intro him on stage.
That's right. I call her the saber-toothed daughter.
But she shortened to STD, not realizing the connotation.
You did.
It is with great pleasure to have John and Camilla Cleese on Leader Voices today. Welcome.
Thank you. Can we go now?
Well, first of all, how do I address you? Camilla, I feel pretty comfortable with Camilla.
Camilla, Milla, Cece, whatever.
You could call me Eric.
I was thinking, Doctor, Sir, Lord.
Oh, I see. No, I think John will do. I did actually find a clip on television 2 days ago that our wonderful Brendan Biddlecombe, who looks after our social media, had found of me introducing Tina Turner. Can you believe that?
Do you know who that is?
Yes. And I asked Tina, I said I didn't like the name Tina because I call her Eric. But I was astounded. I have no memory of being on stage with Tina Turner at all, but there it was on tape, 1990.
Wow. You were on with Taylor Swift and had no idea who that was.
No,
so that's why I'm so impressed.
I adored
You did, because she gave it right back to you. When
we got arguing about cats, because she's got some of the strangest cats on earth called Scottish folds, which have their ears sort of folded over. And I said to her, what happened to the cats? She said,
so I take it you're a dog person.
What do you mean? I said, well...
What kind of accident did it have? I think something like that. And then she scooted away from him on the couch, which was a beautiful moment. And he scooted toward her.
It was I thought she was quite wonderful. Then I discovered she was infinitely more famous.
Maybe not
than
funnier.
I had any idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a superstar.
Let's start at the very beginning. So you went to prep school, so did you, Camilla, and I know that you were bullied on day one for being taller than everyone, including the masters. I think you were referred to as
and also for being a bit of a wuss, because I'd grown up perfectly happy, but very solitary, because during the war my parents had moved. About every 6 months we moved somewhere else, so I didn't have much experience. And they also all called me Cheese. Which is kind of obvious. So they were after me for several reasons, but I actually sort of found out that if I made them laugh, that atmosphere just faded away, and I became one of them. So it didn't last very long.
Lasted longer for me.
Did it?
Well, it's funny because it's one of those things I haven't thought about a great deal, but we had kind of a similar upbringing in the regard that moving around a lot of time alone, and being bullied for height and whatnot. And
we should explain to the listeners that Camilla is 7 foot, what is it?
6'1.25", but we don't necessarily talk about the quarter because it's not real relevant after a certain point.
She has freakishly tall legs.
I do have very tall legs, and they are, I will admit, the exact same legs as my father has in shape.
When we walk, we even look as though we're walking. We both have this rather cathedral-like strut.
That's debatable.
I think before the podcast, you were looking for a bed, and my producer, Rick, said, we don't have a bed that size.
That's right. Well,
we don't have a bed at all.
It's a little, height gets more problematical as you get older, because as you get stiffer.
Problematical? Is that a word?
Yes, it's a word in the English language.
I thought it was problematic.
Well, I don't know. Shall we look
Could somebody Google that? Is problematical a word? I'd like to be right for the first time in my life.
I'm pretty sure it's problematic.
Thank you, doctor.
So you were bullied as well for being tall.
Very tall from a very young age. And I think moving around, you're constantly trying to fit in. And I think humor is a great mechanism to get people to like you, even if it's self-deprecating or whatever it may be.
Well, especially if it's self-deprecating.
Yeah.
It creates a community of safety. People feel safe around you when you make them laugh.
When people start laughing, they relax. If you want to know who has the best jokes in the world, it's salesmen. Because then they walk into a situation where they want to sell, and they can tell a couple of good jokes. It immediately relaxes the atmosphere, whereas that sort of tight-lipped stuff simply makes people more anxious and less flexible.
And I think if you're sort of in a mild way bullying yourself, it's hard for them to make fun of you for things that you're already calling out,
It also makes you very likable because you make people laugh and we
don't like egotistical people. I don't think you can like people who are too full of themselves. One of the problems for pompous people is that pomposity seems to sort of fade away or get punctured in a humorous atmosphere. So they like to keep everything very straight and solemn. Do you see what I mean? That's why politicians don't like making jokes, because it's taking a risk. But actually, it's the way to deal with pompous people is to make fun of them, because they can't handle that. They can handle everything else.
Well, I think some of the more successful politicians are the ones that have a sense of humor.
Yes,
that's
right. A few do.
Yeah.
I mean, who do you think of at the moment? Which politician would you say at the moment was quite amusing?
Barack Obama.
Yeah, I was going to say, he and Biden used to be hilarious. I think he got a little serious when the world started falling apart, which is understandable. It's harder to make jokes right now because everything's so crazy. Yeah.
But it's an age-old leadership question. What's more motivating for people that you're leading, fear or love, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And the worst leaders are trying to motivate through fear, which is this whole concept of keeping people in these rigid little boxes versus being human.
Absolutely.
Dictators versus, leaders.
Bullying people and operating out of fear. But I suddenly thought, you see, Ronald Reagan, for whatever you think of his policies, he was funny. He made some very good jokes. And he had a very relaxed, humorous kind of way of putting them across. He was very popular for that reason, I think.
I thought Obama did too, and could be quite self-deprecating at times, and that made him more relatable, but not in a way where what was that thing you used to say about people saying they voted for Bush because they'd want to have a beer with him? And
I had to talk to an audience of 7,000 Bush supporters just after the first debate between him and Gore. Yeah, and I said to the audience, I said I listened to your debate last night about who's going to be your next prime minister. So that gets
President.
a laugh, you see. No, but I said prime minister. I said prime minister.
I didn't get the joke.
That's all right. And they all laughed, and I said I gather you all like the little guy who doesn't speak such good English. And they sort of giggled a little bit and they laughed. And I said, I gather you all would like to have a beer with him. They all say, yeah. And I said, well, if he's not president, you're more likely to be able to have a beer with him, because if he's president, he could be quite busy. I mean, this whole idea you want someone you can have a beer with. No, I want someone who is so startlingly bright and intelligent and well-informed that he makes me feel like a little nothing, and I can then go home and relax knowing that he's in charge. That's what I want in charge.
Are there people that exist of that?
Well, a few. A few.
I was just going to ask, you're so, both of you are extraordinarily intelligent.
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you. He gets it
both
from me.
Both of us very, 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 we're astoundingly intelligent. This morning I cut myself shaving because I suddenly thought, God, I'm intelligent. And just that moment, my concentration, and I just nicked my face a bit. But it can be a disadvantage.
And I spent 10 minutes trying to clean a shadow off the floor recently. So. Genius right here. What can I say?
You're also both extraordinarily kind. Is there anything that really pisses you off?
Oh,
You're
yes.
so
Injustice.
kind and wonderful.
Yeah, I think injustice. I think as you get to my age, which is 81, you just get pissed off that so many things are badly run when they could be run better, particularly in places of work. Why should there not be a nice atmosphere, a friendly atmosphere where people are asked to contribute, make suggestions? Why should it be like that? Why should it be hierarchical? I don't know if you know about this, but in the 30s, Henry Ford had a worker fired at the Red River production unit for laughing. The guy laughed and got fired.
Wow, we would have lasted a long time there.
That's right. And he'd already been warned for smiling. I'm not making this up. I mean, that was the atmosphere. People came to work as a sort of purgatory in order that they could not work when they finished. And why? There should be a nice atmosphere. People should be interested. People said to me once, somebody said, if you want to know what's wrong with the mailroom, ask the people who work in the mailroom. Mm-hmm. And they don't do that. I travel British Airways, and often people pay me to travel first class, and I sit there thinking how badly it's designed. And the air staff, the cabin staff, agree with me. And I say to them, do they ever think of asking you how it might be designed? No, the designers never bothered to do that. It's like a guy said to me, a concierge said at a hotel in Australia, he said, the trouble with hotels, the construction of hotels, is that they're designed by designers, not by hoteliers. Well, I want people to go out when they're doing something and ask other people to look at the problem and give them advice from different angles, not to think they know the whole bloody thing themselves.
Well, I think the airlines have some sort of conspiracy with chiropractors. They're getting kickbacks to make the seats so painful that you have to go see the chiropractors. Because the whole point of a headrest, it seems, should be that you should be able to rest your head on it. But when it actually pushes your head forward and therefore gravity means that's impossible to do, how is it a headrest anymore?
You just want things are better if they're run properly and run sensibly. You take waiters drive me crazy.
That's because he's never waited tables before.
No, my daughter has. She was quite good, actually.
Well, that might be an overstatement. I was a better waiter than bartender. Everyone should have to wait tables because it gives you you learn a lot about people, and it's a lot harder, when it's busy and you're running so many different tables, and it's more difficult than you'd anticipate, but you learn so much about just people in general.
Absolutely.
And what I find is if you ask anything and they don't know, and they ought, when they come in, they should know what the soup du jour is, what the soup of the day is. Mm-hmm. That's good. What's the soup of the day today? Oh, minestrone, fine. And then they say, I'll just double check that. Pretending that they've already checked it, that they haven't, and they're going back to make absolutely sure, when the truth is they don't have a fucking clue.
Probably because a lot of people aren't as old and don't order soup.
It's funny, when we went to dinner, it was almost like something out of your writing where the waiter just kept coming at the exact time.
His timing was impeccable.
I believe when they go to waiters' school, they're taught the structure of jokes so that they can come in
Right
on
the
moment of
punchline.
punchline.
Yeah. I feel like some of the improv clubs train their waitresses like that too. Because I can't tell you how many times that's happened. And on stage, you just want to be like, really? But you can't
don't
yell
know
at the staff.
You don't know. You think, why did that joke not work? We had a great joke when I was first in a club in New York in '64. We had an absolutely great joke to close the show, and it wasn't getting a laugh. And we said, what is happening? And then somebody said, that's when they present the bill.
Checks, yeah.
Oh, yeah, the check drop is a notorious...
Yeah.
And all the great clubs are owned by comics because they know to give, like, they'll drop it right at the end of the set when the host comes up to say goodnight rather than on the closing joke of the...
Yes, that's right.
You know, and that makes such a difference. It's amazing. And I'm weirdly good at math, and so sometimes if I'm on for the check drop, I'll just go around and look at people's bills and tell them how much to tip if I can see them for the stage.
awesome.
Yeah, because I can, weirdly, I can calculate percentages very quickly, so I can tell them what 18%, 15%. I don't have many other skills, but...
Well, she was California riding on horses champion when she was 18. That was a skill.
Yeah, it was an expensive one, too.
Yes.
For you.
The fathers used to watch the daughters riding, and they would say to each other, at least it's not yachting.
Yachting demolition derbies, I think, would be the only more expensive sport.
You were freakishly good at math as well.
I was reasonably good at maths. I wondered if I could study it at Cambridge, and they said, no, you're not good enough. They said, you can study science. And then I got to Cambridge, and I found that the other students coming up to Cambridge were actually interested in science. And I felt this gave them a real... I felt this was unfair, gave them an advantage over me, so I switched to law. But I could do maths. I think mathematically and I think scientifically, which is a lot more than a lot of scientists do, which is why I'm so interested in paranormal stuff.
What I always found funny was that your lawyer or manager that you went to Cambridge with.
Oh, yes.
That used to...
Yes, that's right. I'll tell the story because it is very strange. He was a year behind me, and he was a good friend because he was in the footlights with me. And when I left Cambridge, I gave him all my notes. And he then passed his exam on my notes and then became my lawyer.
Oh, that's incredible.
Isn't that wonderful? There's a lovely guy called Jim Beach who now manages Queen and Monty Python.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
It's lovely, isn't it?
Very much so.
Although I don't know if I would hire someone that cheated off me to then...
Oh, I didn't cheat. I mean, I just gave him the notes.
I said, but that you did a lot of the work for him.
Yeah, that's right, because writing the stuff down is boring. They should have it already printed out, then they can talk about it. But if you're busy trying to make sure you got everything, you're wasting energy. You should have it. You should have the lecturer's notes in front of you already. Then you can look at them and really understand them, and just instead of trying to think, what did he just say?
Well, since you were in university, they invented the printing press. So,
did you get a lot of stuff? I mean, do they hand out the notes?
The textbooks effectively were what the professor would lecture, but it would just be basically they were reading the textbook, which is why I never went to class.
Yeah, that's right. Somebody once said that lecture is a mysterious process by which the notes on the pad of the lecturer pass to the pad of the student without passing through the mind of either.
Yeah.
That's very well put.
Yeah.
You were teaching as well, and I remember reading in your autobiography about how when you were a schoolmaster, which is I think the British term that they use, it was essentially 10-year-olds and
yes, that's right.
history, and you were learning you were essentially preparing the night before.
Oh, I was terrified. I went to see I went back to teach at a school I'd been at, and I went back to see the headmaster, whom I liked a lot, Mr. Jeffrey Tolson, and he said, well, you got 2 years off before you can get into Cambridge. Would you like to come and teach here? And I loved the place, so I said, I'd love to, but I said, what do you want me to teach? And he said, I want you to teach English, history, and geography. And I said, Mr. Tolson, the last 3 years I've done nothing but science. I don't know anything about any of those. And he said, John, he said, they're 10-year-olds, stay a page ahead. Wonderful.
It's funny how many of my friends from high school, because most of them stayed back in Lake Forest, Illinois, and they all have like 3 or 4 children. It's not like the LA mentality where we're still not grown up yet at my age. But I've been teaching some of their kids math homework because they can't do their 8-year-olds math homework. And they remember, I mean, they all cheated off my math homework in high school. So I got a bunch of phone calls early on, like, could you help with this? I'm like, I think I can handle that. I just have to try and not swear while I do it.
So what are you most proud of, both of you?
Me.
Yes, I think the hardest job in the world, I'll be soppy for a moment, is being a parent. Because you never know. If you get feedback straight away, you know whether it's good or bad. You see what I mean? If you hit a tennis shot, well, you know pretty soon whether it was a good shot or not. But in parenting, you do something, and then sort of 25 years later, you start thinking, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And that's why it's so difficult to try and mix the right degree of affection and love and support with a certain amount of discipline, because we need to learn the discipline, and if we don't, it makes kids very anxious. That's why they often misbehave, because they actually want the teacher to lay a few lines down and make it clear what the rules are. If they know what the rules are, they're fine. And they don't mind strict teachers because it's consistent. And they don't mind relaxed teachers who don't care so much because they're consistent. What they hate is teachers who are very, do it by the book one day and very loose the next day.
Yeah.
I'd
say there's truth to that. I'd say there's truth to that. I think the one downfall having a comedian as a parent is sometimes you would do something in school that, like I once wrote a paper on why the assignment was stupid, and I called into the dean of students office, and they called my dad, and he thought it was hilarious, and that, maybe I should have been reprimanded, but it was sort of a...
Why? I mean, the whole thing...
It's
Exactly.
so important to ask questions.
Yeah.
So
question
important.
authority.
But you know what frightens teachers more than anything else is the thought of losing control.
Yeah.
And if people start
As it
getting
should.
too creative, what?
As it should, because we used to get them
Yeah,
to
but
lose
you've got
control all the time.
you've got to control the class, and then when they know who's boss, and accept that because you do it nicely, you have rules, but you enforce them nicely. Then you can let them play much more because they feel safe. They know what the boundaries are.
You had a teacher, Mr. Bartlett, and
Yes.
and it was essentially, you mentioned that your motivation in his classroom wasn't that you were afraid of his rage, but you were fearful of losing his approval. But
That's
ironically,
right.
he wasn't very fond of you.
No, he never particularly liked me. I think dear Mr. Bartlett ultimately was gay, but he was one of those highly moral persons who would never have put anything like that into practice. But I don't think he felt terribly comfortable about women, and he was very kind, and he had his favorites. But nothing untoward ever happened, and I admired him very much. What he struck me as being, he seemed to know everything. It's easy to impress a 12-year-old, but he seemed to know everything. I think I got the impression early on in life that I kind of ought to know everything about everything, and it took me a long time to get rid of that because of that guy's. But he also taught me something else because he was at Oxford, and the thing about Oxford is you've got to compete very, very hard, but you must never be seen to be competing. Do you see what I mean? That puts you in a very difficult...
It's a very British mentality.
Very
isn't
British.
it? Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and it also leads you see, the Oxford people, we never have Oxford prime ministers. They're all Cambridge. The Cambridge people are the talented ones. The Oxford ones are the ones who want power.
Wait, which of the Pythons went to which?
Oh, well, Michael Palin went to Oxford.
Yeah.
And I went to, I was at Cambridge, and he and I were public school boys who were both complete failures. And the other 3 Pythons were grammar school boys, all of whom were head of school.
Didn't Gray go to...
Gray was Cambridge.
And what about Jonesy.
Jonesy was Oxford. So I mean, I don't particularly think of it in those two, but if you look at cabinets, there have always been many, many more Oxford people than Cambridge people. And the Cambridge people seem to me, on the whole, to do much better in the arts. I mean, my first show was directed by Trevor Nunn, who then went on to manage the National Theatre and the Royal Shakespeare Company. An extraordinary group. And
Yeah, the amount that came out of Footlights is extraordinary, isn't it?
Extraordinary. But also out of the series. I mean, Richard Eyre ran the National Theatre for years, and he was an exact contemporary of mine, a friend of mine at Cambridge. Whereas these Oxford people, they all wanted to go into politics or journalism.
That's what I was going to ask. What were their majors before humor became such a huge part?
Well, I think in the old days they would have done what were known as greats, which was basically classics for studying Greek and Latin. That was the main thing. Then there were always people who did PPE, which is politics, philosophy, and what was the other? Economics. PPE.
Not personal protective equipment
always,
or whatever it is.
No, right, yeah, not
Very
protective equipment, but they were always pushing for power, and the Cambridge people didn't seem this. And I've only noticed this in the last few years.
Very interesting. So in your autobiography, you talk about a couple gifts, essentially constant relocation, parental disharmony, and a third gift, which is maternal deprivation, which spurred your creativity.
I guess we have those in common.
I was going to say,
I'm afraid Camilla's mom was not an awfully good mom.
Well, she had a huge heart.
A
but
huge
what is it
heart.
you used to say?
Well, I used to say she had a wonderful heart, but nothing else worked particularly well. But she was very generous-spirited and open, but she was completely chaotic, and I made a huge mistake when I was 9 by letting her to
Not
take...
when you were 9.
Did I say when I was 9? Oh, yes.
I was a mere imagination.
At that time. But when she was 9, her mother wanted to take her to Chicago, and I let her go, and a lot of difficulties came along.
I think in those times. And
well, the experts said, she needs to be with her mother, but it was a bad mistake.
But growing up, you also relocated quite a bit and witnessed...
not because of the war, I guess because of warring parents, not so much you, but Mom we moved to the U.S. because she was supposed to remarry, and then that didn't work out, and then we moved again because she was getting remarried, and then Dad moved to California, and I moved there because I was warring with the head of the school that I was at.
So we got Camilla to California, and which was great. It was a wonderful
until
moment.
you then couldn't be in the country for tax reasons.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What an attestment of your love.
Yeah.
Well, she's very special.
Of course, and you work really well together. And it's ironic that you frame these as gifts, whereas many people would say they were traumas, but they were
everything's, there's paradox is what the life is about. Nothing is simply good or bad. You have too good a break. We were talking about this a couple of days ago. You have too good a bringing up, too easy, too kind. When something goes wrong, you're struggling because you don't know that the world was this hard. Whereas if you have a hard life, then you're used to that and you can fight your way through it. So everything's got a good side and a bad side to it. In that case, traveling all the time is apparently one of the things that people who are very creative have in common. Because from very early on in their lives, they have to compare where they are now with where they were and the place before that. And the act of comparing things, that is not good for people who live in Nebraska, because that's where they live and they don't realize there are many other ways of living. Right? And the answer is travel broadens the mind. The more you see of other cultures and other people, the more relaxed you come about your own rules.
Well, and it gives you a perspective that every culture has its ups and downs, and well, maybe not North Korea, but like there's, on the whole, you just have such a different perspective, and you're able to laugh at the things that deserve to be laughed at about certain places. And I think, I don't know, I've always said what doesn't kill you makes you funnier. I don't know if that's...
It's great. And humor is a great coping mechanism for
It
trauma.
It is. I mean,
And
all
it's the fastest way to make friends when you're
Yeah,
moving
that's
around all
right.
the time. You have to be a bit of a chameleon and sort of adapt to your circumstances, and it's much easier to make friends with people than it is to just.
And also, I've come to the conclusion that if, when people say, well, who am I, or who do you think you are, all those kind of philosophical discussions about identity, I think our identity, our little identity bracelet, is our sense of humor. Because our sense of humor involves all our value systems. Do you see what I mean? I think when you laugh with someone, there's a marvelous moment of emotional contact between the two of you.
Yeah.
And Tom Stoppard, our great playwright, said a couple of years ago, he said, the shortest distance between two people is a laugh.
Oh, I like that.
Isn't that beautiful?
And it's so true. I mean, even with an audience where it's ultimately strangers, I mean, he's lucky. Yes, he's earned it. But when people buy tickets to his show, they are going to see him. And so there's already a fondness, but creating that relationship with the audience when you're doing stand-up, when nobody knows who you are and you have to sort of earn it. I think
And
that's
you get
especially
good
true.
audiences and bad audiences.
Yes.
Some of them are very slow and you think they hate you, and then at the end you get a very good reception, and they were just receiving it in their own way. You see what I mean? It's very hard to tell, but when audiences don't laugh, you get uncomfortable, particularly the
yes.
first 2 minutes.
Yeah, you
The
get used
vulnerabilities.
to. I mean, at a certain point, I think you stop caring too much, which I maybe shouldn't say in the president.
No, but some
president
audiences,
of the
in some
comedy club,
audiences
but-
you don't. In some audiences you give up on. I
Yes,
did an
'cause you know they're
audience
not on your
once
level.
in
Right.
Dunedin in New Zealand, and it was a matinee, and there was this strange noise before and we all stood by the curtain. We said, what is it? We peeped around the curtain, and every single person in the audience was 75-year-old woman with a cup of tea. And the noise was the rattle of the cups. And during the entire performance, that was the only sound coming from the audience at all. They never laughed at anything.
I cringe at just hearing this story and imagining that.
And it becomes very funny, because if you tell a joke, Camilla, is this right? If you tell a joke and the audience goes, ha, 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 you want to kill yourself.
Yeah.
But if you tell a joke and there's complete silence, it can be very funny.
Well, to us, is when we're on stage together, and if something doesn't land, it becomes particularly funny. And I can't make eye contact with him, because once one of us starts to laugh, the other one starts to laugh, and then the whole audience is just wondering why they're laughing, because it's not going well. But
And we do
think
have,
it's
that sense, we do have all professional comedians have got a slightly hard sense of humor. They can stand back and see the humor in almost anything. And when I was on stage with Eric Idle once in Florida, a nice middle-aged a woman stood up and said, "May I ask a serious question?" I said, "Of course." She said, "Mr. Idle, Mr. Cleese, did the Queen kill Diana?" And silence. I was the only one laughing.
we
that's
love
quite
the
funny.
awkward.
It is funny. Yeah.
Well, your answer was the.
Oh, that's right. I said in the end, because I was the only one laughing, when I recovered, I said, well, certainly not with her bare hands.
I think there's a bit of a tendency, and I think you do this too, where if they get offended or like, oh, that's too much, it's like, oh, you didn't like that? Well, you're going to hate this.
Right.
And then you just kind of have
Reward
to.
them.
But if you don't take it too seriously, if the audience is a little upset and you kind of make a joke about it, like I do a particular thing, because I believe a lot of PC is very condescending. And I will do jokes about French and Belgians and Australians and Canadians and Germans. And then I say there were these two Mexicans. You can hear a pin drop.
Everyone's like,
And I say, what happened? Well, it all went a bit quiet. Did I miss something? And then the audience laughs because they're recognizing what I'm talking about.
Right.
and the
Which
joke that you tell it is very funny and very like affectionately
Yeah, I tell a
teasing.
very affectionate Mexican joke, and everyone laughs. And I said, you see, the difference is you can make jokes about people, provided it's not mean.
Right.
Because all humor actually is slightly critical. We cannot laugh at perfect people because perfect people are not funny. Humor is about things going wrong and our foibles. Do you see what I mean?
Yes,
and you can either be nasty about them and do nasty teasing, which is horrible, and we don't do that, or else you
Except
can
to our children.
But you're also pointing out the absurdity.
Yes.
Because it's okay for them to laugh if it's.
Of course it is.
Well,
I mean, she
it's
speaks very good Spanish. We had a Spanish maid in Santa Barbara, is one of the loveliest people in our lives. They are very hard-working, but they have a sense of humor. The moment you reach out to them, the Mexicans have a wonderful sense of humor.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to add, because one of the points that you often make in the show, which I think is something that you never hear enough, and you're the only person I've ever heard say it, is it not more patronizing to think that one group of people could take a joke, but we have to protect another because
Because they're
like,
so
that's like
weak.
saying they're
Absurd.
inferior,
They're so
you
weak
know?
and pathetic and feckless that we have to
Yeah.
look after them because they can't look after themselves. And that's one of my major objections to the PC and the wokes, is this terrible condescension, because they're not usually offended themselves. They're usually offended on someone else's behalf. Now, let's think about that.
Right, you're essentially taking a mirror and pointing it at the audience to say, look at yourself and the
Yeah.
absurdity of what you're not able to laugh at, but the fact that 2 seconds ago you were able to laugh at it if you put X as the
Yeah.
variable
Very
of
good,
any
exactly.
And half the
country.
time, those jokes are interchangeable. You know, I've heard Polish jokes told as blonde jokes or
yes.
Irish jokes. You know, you can switch out almost any bit, and people will laugh as long as it's not one that is considered sort of a marginalized group.
Sure, and intent is important. Going back to what you said, and
Yeah.
it's in a lot of your writing that there's never an intent to be hurtful
No.
or mean,
No.
and that's very important. That it's fun.
Eric Idle wrote a very good sketch once about somebody said, well, read your essay out. And then he said, well, the great problem about God is, how is it possible for someone who is all good and all wise and all knowing to produce a world in which there is evil? And the teacher says, get out.
Oh my! I remember reading about essentially some Catholic schools that you went to where they were essentially traumatizing you for not learning without giving you a chance to learn, and that's before you went to some of the better schools and they would even hit you for not getting the answers correct without.
I got caned on my hand at the age of 7 for not being able to do a long division sum. I mean,
I got hit. Even.
Yeah?
I mean, that's how recent. Yeah.
where?
At Pembridge Hall.
Did you really?
Only once, but then I also got I don't know if you remember, I got a dirty dishcloth shoved in my face by one of the teachers for talking during recess, which you would think they had organized recess, which was about as fun as...
You see, they're all frightened of losing control. That's the fear of teachers. And they have pretty difficult classes to control these days because people don't give enough authority to the teachers. You know, there's too many people who can come in there and say, you shouldn't have said that. You've got to give a certain freedom to the teachers. Let them have their judgment. Now, if they're no good and you find that out, get rid of them.
So with leadership, what kind of advice would you give for leaders in terms of how they can truly lead people without fear?
Well,
Is it
my feeling about leaders is, do they want to use the intelligence of the whole organization or just their own? You see, if they think
the
they know
problem,
everything and everyone's got to do what they say, nobody's going to have a very good time, and it won't be very creative. And if you say, come on, we all want you to contribute, what ideas do you have? And people are frightened of that again because they think they lose control. No, there's got to be control there. And if you have groups with a great deal of freedom, then you must impose budgetary controls on them. But otherwise, let people get on with it. Let them find out. Go to the mailroom and say, what's wrong with the mailroom?
Well, one of the things that he talks about in a great creativity speech that he does is, you know, the fear of making mistakes or the fear of sounding stupid is so inhibiting to creativity. And when I when I first started writing, it was with my dad, and I was very lucky for that because the way that we work together, we think out loud, and I say all my stupid ideas because what if one of my stupid ideas gives him a brilliant idea? Because
you never know when you're
never
being
know.
creative whether what you're saying is good or not. You may find out eventually, okay, that doesn't work, so we don't go down that avenue, but you may say something that's absolutely ridiculous and Camilla might misunderstand it, and suddenly you're off onto something.
Yeah. And it's amazing I got so spoiled working with him because then I went on to work with all these other people where, you know, it wasn't like that, and you felt judged if you said something that wasn't right. But
that's right.
It makes such a difference because then you're holding back, and you're like, "Is this a good idea? I don't know," and it just takes that much longer. And a lot of people get like that around him because they're in awe of him. They don't want to say things. But
yes, this is very bad. I mean, the people in power, the people that watch them the whole time say, "Which way should I jump on this one?" And that's a very bad part. I mean, this is the BBC at the moment, is that everyone's trying not to make a mistake. So
I think it's most production or most networks and
it
streaming.
may be, but the BBC used to have a small number of people who knew what they were doing, who acted out of confidence and would take risks. And that's disappeared now because there's just lots of committees so that if something goes wrong, you can blame everyone and not one person.
Like the BBC when you pitched
Monty Python.
Oh, yeah. Well, we went in to... We just thought we'd like to work together, and we worked together for David Frost 2 or 3 years ago, and we went in and he said, well, what do you propose doing? And we hadn't discussed it. The only pitch meeting in the world where the people were going to make the pitch hadn't bothered to talk about it. And he asked us a couple of questions like, are you going to have guest stars? Are we going to have guest? You see what I mean? This one, music? Well, I haven't really thought about music. And then he looked at us and he said, oh, go away and make 13 programs. Unbelievable.
Amazing.
Just
look
amazing.
What came out of it.
And then we came up with something that was unusually creative because there wasn't a label on it. Do you see what I mean? Because we could just explore because we weren't committed to any particular line of action. And now all the people in charge want to know exactly what's going to happen and what are the plots in all the episodes. And I want to say to them, have you ever written? When you're on aeroplanes, do you send notes up to the pilot suggesting how he should be flying it? If you don't know about writing, don't give people notes. You know, but you can ask them questions, but don't give them notes. And I had an experience with Nina Jacobson at Disney, where she gave me a number of things on a script I was really proud of, and which she loved first time round. And she said, we want these changes made. And I said, Nina, I'm sorry, I don't think I can do this. And she said, well, why not? And I said, because I don't know how to make it worse. You see, I would be trying to make it better, and that's not what you're after. And it really infuriates me that there are so many people. Again, it's control. You see, when people get anxious, they want to control things, even if they haven't the slightest idea what they're doing.
Well, and almost all of your biggest successes, I think it's safe to say, like, I mean, the Fawlty Towers, that famous note, I don't know if you've seen this, but it went viral. One of the BBC executives' response to it said something like, do you remember?
Well, he said it is the characterization is cliched and the very tired situations. I can't see Fawlty Towers as being anything other than a complete disaster. 2 years ago voted best British television program ever made, and the guy whose job it was to assess strip, and even the director who commissioned it, I mean the producer who commissioned it after the first show, he said, you've got to get people out of the hotel, John. Completely wrong.
And A Fish Called Wanda was rejected by how many studios?
Fish Called Wanda was rejected by 11 studios out of 12. MGM went with it, and far worse, Life of Brian.
Oh yeah, no one would touch it, right?
Nobody. Life of Brian, again, voted recently best British comedy of all time. I mean, I don't take that too seriously, but it means that it's up there with the best. And we couldn't get money in England. We came to America, we couldn't get money here. It was the budget was $3 million. Not a lot, even in the late 70s. And nobody wanted to make it. And then, as I say, it's best British comedy ever made.
Well, but tell him the...
Oh, the lovely thing about it, we thought that it was never going to be made. And then Eric rang and said, we got the money. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, George Harrison is going to put the money up. He's a good pal of Eric's. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I gave him the script last night. He read it in bed, said he fell out of bed laughing, and he's putting the money up. I said, what, all the money? He says, yes, he's going to mortgage his house. And then Eric said, well, I asked him why, and and he said, well, I want to see the film. She's wonderful. Bless him up there. Yeah. Bless him, because otherwise we wouldn't have Life at Rome.
He must have done quite well off of that movie.
Well, I hope so.
I mean, not like he needed it after the Beatles, but...
That's incredible. What a gift to the world.
Yeah.
By believing in your art.
That's right. Well, it's wonderful when people... I mean, Cheers, which was one of my very favorite programs of all time, very poor viewing figures for the first year. But the guy...
I think Seinfeld was like that, too.
Yes, it was. That's right. And so the CBS guy, he just believed in it. He said, I don't care about this. I'm going to... Now it finishes up, I think, the second most financially successful series of all time, and people are going to take it off because the viewing figures weren't good. There are people with no judgment who think that numbers... It's not about numbers. It's really not about numbers. Well, marketing people think it is.
And I think it's safe to say with comedies, because the chemistry and the timing is so vital, it can take more than a season for them to hit their stride. Like, it doesn't always come into...
No, as you write a scene, you suddenly find, oh, that worked rather well. And then you write more of that kind of scene. You think the other scene wasn't so good, so you write less of them. So as you're going along, it's a creative process. But they want now to know the plots of all the episodes before they greenlight the series. And the answer is they don't have a fucking clue what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a real emphasis on collecting as much data as possible.
Yeah, people do not understand that life is fundamentally uncertain, and they'll cling on to things in the same way that evangelists cling on to literal interpretations of the Bible. I want to say to them, Christ taught in parables, friend. Parables are not supposed to be taken literally. That's the definition of a parable. They haven't thought of that.
Well, they don't question it.
That's right.
I was trying to do a stand-up bit, which I can't get away with. You probably could, but because religion and politics are such touchy subjects. But if you think about how many, at least for me personally, how many relationships have ended because of text messaging and misinterpreting a text, if you think of the Bible essentially as just one long text message, it's no wonder that we have so many wars over it. You know, it's like the different interpretations are endless because you don't have the tone of voice, you know. And
that's right. The greatest religious tradition for me is the Buddhists, because they have personal transmission. The teaching there is personal. Until you've got to a pretty high level, you're not allowed to teach people. Whereas here you can go to a Southern Methodist, and pick up some phony degree there and then open an evangelistic church. It's a joke. You've got to have high standards, not just let everyone in.
And everything that's written is essentially open to interpretation. If you look at Shakespeare and all the different variations that the films had, that each director took their interpretation. Brano did it in terms of madness and intelligence, the close relationship.
Well, last week, a writer I love and admire, and I know a little bit, Maureen Dowd, was just saying about Taming of the Shrew. There's a speech at the end in which he basically says that women should be subjugated and do what the men tell them. She said, how can we have this today? And when I was asked to play Petruchio, I said to Jonathan Miller, who'd asked me, I said, well, how do we do this last speech? And he said, it's a joke between the two of them. They're laughing at the people who are nodding. And if you do it that way, it completely inverts it. So there's utter freedom of interpretation, and this is why you've got to have people in charge who are pretty well educated, not sort of bums.
And people that can listen.
Yes, people who are...
And delegate. I mean, I think that's I hate hate to go back to the presidency, but like, you can't know all of everything there is to know about all the different departments in the government. You have to hire the smartest people and most knowledgeable people in each of those
Exactly. Well,
areas,
that's
and
what
then
I'm talking about,
listen and
using the
delegate.
intelligence of the whole organization, and
Yeah.
instead of using the organization to enforce your narrow set of ideas.
Yeah, openness is very important. And
You've got to listen to people, because nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows. And people say about science, they think that science is a process of discovering that something that was very useful for some time isn't quite right. We have to moderate it. And people hang on to science as though it's a belief system. It's not a belief system. It's a method of experimentation. It's a method of discovery. Do you see what I mean?
Sure.
And there is, if you believe Karl Popper, who I think is the greatest of the philosophers about science, any theory's got to be falsifiable. Because if you can't prove that it's wrong, it doesn't have any value. And it may last like Newton's physics did for 300 years, but then Einstein comes along and says, yes, it's very useful, Newtonian physics, but it's not the whole story, because there's other things going on. And then Niels Bohr comes along and it comes up with quantum mechanics, and Einstein can't go that far. He says, I don't think God plays a dice with the universe. And so you see the whole process of people thinking they've discovered the truth and then hanging on to it when it's all provisional.
the beauty of the constant evolution and
Absolutely,
ability
and
to improve.
openness. I mean, just read anything that Richard Feynman said, who's one of my heroes. He said something like, I would rather live in a pleasant state of uncertainty than believe strongly in things that I know I can't really know.
So talk to me, are you ever starstruck by anyone?
I have been a few times.
Yes.
When you talk about your greatest heroes, they're scientists and philosophers and...
They're mainly, they're mainly writers. Well, I think writers, I've always liked ideas. A lot of people aren't interested in ideas. I'm more interested in ideas than almost anything. And every time I get a new slant on something, Camilla's the same.
Yeah. Well, I think I was taught, or maybe just picked up on from a young age, to question everything, which is some people's worst nightmare as a teacher and stuff. But I always like things to make sense, and I want to understand the logic
That's
behind
right.
it. And I still struggle. If I can't logically explain something, it'll drive me insane. But
Yeah.
and I
Well,
think
I
you're
have
a
all
little
this
bit
trouble
like
with
that.
the internet, because it seems to me that most of the internet is not as logical as I expect it to be.
Like-
People often say, if it goes wrong, we'll just switch it off and switch it on again. I said, but that's not logic. It's all right, and it works.
I think more than the internet, you mean just the way that technology functions, like the issues where that is totally intuitive to my generation because we grew up with it. Like I can solve those problems just by playing around. But I think another thing.
And you've also got great persistence. When she gets her nose into a problem, she doesn't get her
Oh, I'll
nose
find
out
the
of it
answer.
until he's figured it out.
Well, I think that's fair to say, though, too, from growing up. Like, I had to figure a lot of things out for myself because when you're alone a lot, you do. And, like, you know, I think it's fair to say I have two parents who can't operate a laundry machine or a washing machine or a dryer or a
A what?
dishwashing
A what?
machine.
A dryer? What
Yeah.
do they do?
Your clothes don't go in the dryer because then they shrink and we have a problem. And a lot of mine don't either, because when you're tall, you don't want the Britney Spears look if you're not going for the Britney Spears look, especially if you're my dad. But, you know, a lot of it was just having to figure things out. And I'm grateful for that skill, because I have some friends who are like, the TV doesn't work. And I'm like, well, is it plugged in? You know, like there's a process of deduction to find the
She's
real-
just written a sitcom, which is extremely insulting about me. I'm in it. It was
It's
about
an
the
exaggerated version of you.
I know, but it's very funny.
Tell us
all
about
the
it.
things about not knowing how things work, and it's all plug it in or switch it on, you know.
Well, it's me, sort of, gosh, more than 10 years ago now, I suppose, but at a time in my life when, for the sake of the pilot, me and my two best friends, who are very American, were all working in the entertainment industry, but sort of models / bartender at that level, and we're renting a house from him, but is much nicer than we could otherwise afford, while he lives with his wife in Santa Barbara, and he kind of shows up on the doorstep and announces he's coming to live with us and getting a divorce, and then
Another one.
yeah, I think it's his sixth, and for the sake of the pilot, but and we have to adjust, to having him in the house, which, there's certain, like, it's really about the adult-child-parent relationship, and how, as you get older.
And it's also about this huge generation gap between people who pick up iPads and know automatically how they work, and somebody like myself who got into Cambridge to study science, who still can't figure the damn things out.
Well, and he has this great career, and I'm trying to get my career going and get out of his shadow, and now his shadow's there. But, like, as you get older, you become more of a parent to your parent,
Yeah,
and I think that's
right.
Exacerbated by
In fact, the relationship
the celebrity
gets
aspect.
the relationship, if it's right, I think gets more interesting,
Yeah.
because it becomes much more cooperative. Do you know what I mean? I think one of the problems, I had a lovely father, but one of the problems as I got older was that he always wanted to maintain the father-son relationship rather than allowing me to grow to be an equal.
Yeah.
And so he would sit and give me advice about things that I knew more about than he did. And I thought, what's the purpose? And the purpose is to reinstate the relationship of the father telling the son about how the world works.
Like when you give relationship advice. I'm kidding. Neither of us.
What's
are
my
good.
advice like on the whole? I'm
It's
asking-
funny, actually. A lot of times you give very good relationship advice.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of my friends call me for relationship advice, and I'm like, I'm 37 and single. I don't know why you're calling me, but I
Well,
think
they say you know a lot about marriage. I said, well, I know more about divorce, but I may be able to help.
I should have been a divorce lawyer. I would have done very well.
They do well, too.
They do.
Provided they can get the mediators out of the way. So one of the things that is absolutely disgraceful about lawyers, family lawyers, is that when there's a divorce pending, the first thing that the two lawyers on either side try to do is to get the mediators out of the way. That is wicked.
It sounds like you have a great friendship.
We do.
It's
Yeah.
fundamentally important.
Yeah.
It sounds like your father was interested in maintaining, creating a
Well,
friendship.
he couldn't
but
let me
maintaining-
grow. He wanted to keep me in the son position, and the whole point was I grew to the point when I was equal with him, and I think this is what's happening with us.
Well, I think also
That's great.
I think it's fair to say, you're not a huge fan of little children.
Oh, no. Oh,
Yeah.
awful. Awful.
But once you can walk and talk and do Lego and play games, then he loves.
I think the great thing about women is they've been wired to like babies, and I think it's almost impossible
all of
to
them,
like
but-
babies. No, not all of them. But babies are just horrible.
Yes, they're very
Horrible
needy,
little
they
creatures.
smell.
Space invaders. They're smelly. They're selfish. They're
They're
noisy.
noisy.
They
Yes.
can't discuss anything. I think they're an absolute disaster. And the lovely thing about women is they look at these awful little creatures and this lovely maternal smile spreads over the fathers waiting until they can play table tennis.
Or they hire nannies.
Yes. Yeah. So your mom created a list of reasons that she no longer wanted to live, and
Yeah.
you gave her an idea.
Well, yes, she did. She was a depressed lady, a great worrier. She used to write her worries down, right, so that if she wouldn't forget any, which is pretty extraordinary. But she used to get depressed, and she would ring me up and be very depressed. And on one occasion, it was you don't want your mother to be depressed, but the depressive tend to be depressed. Do you see what I mean? It's very hard to cheer them up. And I did something once, probably the most creative thing I ever did. She was listing the reasons she didn't want to go on living, and I said, "Mother, I have an idea." And she said, "Oh, what is that?" And I said, "If you're still feeling this way next week," I said, "I could call a little man I know in Fulham, and if you like, but only if you like, he could come down and kill you." And there was a startled silence, and then she hooted with laughter. And it was funny because it completely changed her mood. And from then on, if she started saying how tough life was, and it is as you get older, I would listen for a bit and say, "Oh, should I call the little man in Fulham?" And she'd giggle and say, "No, I got a sherry party on Friday. I don't want to miss that." I mean, it became, we were able to reframe it. That's the phrase.
And connect.
You'll miss me when I'm gone.
She used to say that, "You'll miss me when I'm gone." Used to drive me crazy. And one time I said, "No, I won't." She said, "Why not?" And I thought, I'm going to say this one. I said, "Because, Mum, when you die, I am going to take you to a taxidermist and have you stuffed. And I'm going to put you in a glass case by the door. And every time I go out in the morning, I just say, 'Hello, Mummy.' That's why I will not miss you." And she was really pleased. She boasted about it at the retirement home. She said, "When I die, my son's going to have me stuffed."
He used to tell that story in a show we did together, and we'd actually had a model, remember?
Yes, we did.
A stuffed mother.
On wheels.
And someone right at the perfect timing would just push her onto the stage, and she would roll down.
Roll down the camber of the stage and come right out the middle. We should put that back in. It was very funny, that, wasn't it?
Funny.
Yeah.
I think I still have it somewhere in storage.
Have you?
Yeah.
There is. We had a cannon. We used to fire
I
a
still
cat
have the
out
cannon.
Yeah, we used to fire a cat out of a cannon.
That was the natural way
Alive?
to end the show. Well, we got very good. We did have 2 alive cats, and then we had like a stunt cat with a little helmet on it. We got very good at like.
Cat?
Well, it was
Does it have
stuffed.
training?
It
Okay.
wasn't like a real cat, but
We
got
used to
very
put
good
a
at
real cat into the car, distract the audience, and while they were looking the other way, we'd switch it for a stuffed cat, and then we'd fire the stuffed cat.
Yeah, and he would say, "Get the nets," and I would run off stage and come back with a butterfly net. "No, not those nets, the big nets." So we'd come on with like a fishing net, but the first one would overfire, and you'd hear and like smashing glass, and then we'd all try to act like that's what was supposed to happen, and they'd bring on the other cat that looked
And I would
completely
pretend it was the same
different,
cat.
and do it again, and then the second cat exploded, and
Well, he fell apart. He was just blown to pieces by the cat.
yeah,
How
which
delightful.
is similar to exploding.
We should do that again. It was so much fun, that
It
sketch.
was fun, and then I
Yeah,
had
what
to
were you-
behead him at the end of it, which was I still have anxiety about in my dreams. Because we had a guillotine, and he'd said, "If this time it doesn't work, I'm going to kill myself right here on this very stage." And when it didn't work the second time, we'd roll out this guillotine, and I had to pull the thing. And given it was made very well, and it was done by the people that did the Lord of the Rings props. We were touring in New Zealand, of all places. But every night I'd have to pull the string, and there would just be this like moment of like, please don't let this go wrong, because he really did have his neck through the.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just
right.
a little piece of wood.
There
which
was something there, a
protects-
tiny bit of wood or metal that stopped it going through the neck,
And
but
then
it came down boom, like
and
that.
it triggered the blade underneath to fall all the way through, and then I would stand in front just for enough time for him to pull his head out, and then I had like a fake head with blood on it. It was all very dark and twisted.
Very dark
No-
and twisted. That's a
No
good name for a
animals
show.
have been injured during the recording of this podcast.
Right? No, never. We love animals. Humans, meh.
No, humans are about cats. I believe that cats and dogs are just about the most important things in our lives, because when we're with them, we live in the moment.
Yeah.
We go to the moment that they're in, and that's so good for us. That's why it helps in old folks' homes and these kind of places, retirement homes. It really helps to have pets around, because people just emotionally emigrate to be with the pet, and then their blood pressure comes down.
The
He
unconditional
loves
love.
his cats.
What?
Your cats.
Oh, I just love them.
You love my dog too, but not as
Oh,
much
she's got the silliest little dog. Tell her about rescue.
as Hercules. Someone had thrown him out a second-story window, which,
Can you believe that?
That's
like a
terrible.
baby, I could understand.
Not this cute little puppy.
No, he's just the love of my life. He can't turn right, which is a bit strange.
He really can't.
He's not an ambi-turner.
He can only turn
goes
to the left. It's fascinating. We've had him out on stage, and using a laser dot, we've tried to get him to turn right.
It's funny. The first time it happened, it was an accident, but we're on stage one night, and Dad was talking about something particularly morbid. I think you were talking about death and afterlife, and suddenly the whole audience, oh, and I immediately figured out what was going on. Of course, he was a bit confused and kind of looking around, and Hercules was right under his legs. The tech guy was supposed to be watching him and had lost track of him, and he made it onto the stage. But then we realized it was free laughs, so we just let him come and go as he pleased. But the second you point out he can't turn right, all the audience pays attention to is him not being able to turn right. And it's all like we'd have to get him off stage before they'd focus. Yeah.
Well, tell me what's next. What's next, and where do we get to see you?
I'm very much hoping that the people in charge will have the intelligence to realize that this half hour as relatively speaking, is very
famous.
Funny.
Relatively famous.
Sorry,
that's the name of my
famous.
pilot.
Relatively
incredible.
Speaking is one of my favorite plays. Relatively famous. That's what I'm hoping. I've also written a light comedy about cannibalism, which is called Yummy. And my great delight is that I sent the detailed treatment to an old friend, Frank Oz, originally the Muppets, Jim Henson's right-hand man. And
who made me cry when I was 5.
He took Miss Piggy down off the wall, and suddenly she became alive, and it frightened the shit out of me.
Yeah. Maybe I was 25.
No, you were tiny.
I'm kidding, Dad.
No, but I mean, when it came down, it was quite startling. When he took it down off the wooden peg.
If only I'd known how lucky I was. You know, it's one of those things you just don't.
Anyway,
understand.
Frankie's directed 11 good films, including Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, which he asked me to be in, and I couldn't because my marriage to her mother was in a mess, and I thought I ought to sort it out. Sad moment then. And he also did Death at a Funeral recently, which is a wonderfully funny film. So he wants to make it, so we might make it next year, a first comedy about cannibalism.
Incredible.
And what else have you got?
Well, Fish Called Wanda.
Oh, yes. Camilla and I have written the book. We've got a very good book for Fish Called Wanda. And I've done some lyrics, which John Dupre, who did the original Wanda film, has put music to. He also did Spamalot. And Camilla doesn't like them.
I haven't even heard them yet.
What?
I haven't heard these songs. The only one that I didn't like was the one you wrote like 10 years ago that was like, oh, I hate the Brits. They really are the pits. They're the shits. They're absolute gits or something like that.
That's
and I
right.
was like,
That was,
that might be a little on the simple side.
Well, it's all right. That's okay. It's simple
long as
because
it's
it's sung
true.
by somebody very simple.
Anyway, hopefully it'll be a Broadway musical.
Otto. Yeah, hopefully it'll be a Broadway. What else do we have?
We have the Lookalikes movie.
Oh, yeah. Tell them about that.
I think is very funny premise. Are we allowed to talk about that, do you think?
Well, it's about Hollywood lookalikes and how they get confused with the real ones.
Doppelgangers.
Well, yeah, but they're all played, of course, by the actual celebrities, which makes it fun because you can have a Jackie Chan that can't do martial arts, or a LeBron James that can't play basketball, but all of their skill sets, and there winds up being kind of a heist, and it's a fun. Really
well, we're
fun
working on.
premise.
We've got the first 2/3 are great. We can't get the third right yet, but it's one of the next things we're going to do. What else have we got? I got a movie in the West Indies. I've got to go to the West Indies in a month and to a little island, another little island called Nevis, and go into quarantine for 2 weeks, and I can't even talk to people through a loudhailer.
A what?
A loudhailer, or what do you call those?
A megaphone.
A megaphone.
Oh, okay.
I'm not even allowed to do that. I'm going to be on my own for 2 weeks.
It sounds like a dream come true if I know you at all.
Yeah, introverts aren't so put out by this as extroverts.
And the Great Emu War.
Oh, yes, we just finished a script with Rob Schneider
Incredible.
about an emu war. And
It's based on a true story, which is kind of hard to believe, but the Australian army went to war with emus and lost.
1932, because the emus were destroying the farmers' crops and they didn't know how to stop them.
Yeah, so that, and I think Jim Jeffries and Rhys Darby, it looks like hopefully will be in it, and Rob, of course, and my dad, and Monty, the lovely Monty Franklin, who's a great comic and a good friend of mine, and
very distinguished stand-up comic. I didn't know his name, but he's played with everyone. He's open for most of the best people.
Yeah, he's been doing it a long time. He's great.
Wonderful.
So
It sounds like you have a
fun.
lot coming, and we are so excited.
There's a lot more too, but I can't even remember anymore.
Well, the trouble is you never know what's going to happen at the moment.
The bottom line is comedians are smarter than the general population.
Just talk about it for a moment.
So my research essentially shows that mainly, sometimes it's a defense mechanism, and I think reading your autobiography, it confirms a lot of my suspicions, and learning more about you, Camilla, as well, that as comedians are growing and developing, they experience different elements of trauma, different elements of constantly trying to understand the world around them, whether it's from moving around a lot or witnessing their parents having relational issues, addiction, different types of exposure. And they find a way to make sense of the world by connecting with people through laughter. And it builds their confidence, and in a sense, it heals them and allows them to be themselves, which I think is what everyone wants to do in life. Just be themselves, be authentic.
I think that's right. This is what I like about comics. When Rupert Murdoch nearly took over a television station in England, he didn't eventually. I said to my agent, do you think any actors will refuse to appear on the channel in form of protest? And he said, I don't think actors will, but I think comedians will.
It's
And
so true.
That's what I like. They're an ornery
It's powerful.
bunch, and they want authenticity, and I love them all.
And they'll all gang together. Like there's a camaraderie that doesn't exist among actors.
Yes.
Actors.
No,
Like,
that's right.
If there's if someone attacks one comic, and it's someone that they hold dear to the community, everyone will defend them and jump on board.
Yeah. And what's so interesting, as you say, is that they're much brighter than people think, because people think for some reason that drama is somehow a superior art. And I met a number of people who are good at straight acting and good at comedy, and they will always say comedy's the harder, which is why there are so many great dramas and so few good comedies.
Yeah. It's hard.
The community is critical because you surround yourself with people who make you feel safe, so you're able to
Yes.
be daring
I think
and
that's
creative.
why they are so supportive, because when you die as a comedian, it's a terrible feeling going out and not getting laughs. And I think they're all sort of gathering together to make sure that that isn't experienced. With actors don't die. They may bore people. They
Right.
don't die.
Right, extreme vulnerability.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things I love about the community of stand-ups, at least, like, it's the one place you can go to work and someone says, how are you today? And you can say, oh, I'm so depressed. No one's going to judge you. You're not going to not get booked for that. It's like everyone will say, oh, me too. I'm going through, what's wrong? Are you okay? Like,
Whereas actors will say, never better.
yeah.
Greatest day of my life.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, thanks again. I
Great
cannot
pleasure.
tell
Thank
you
you for
how
having
much of
us.
an honor it is to have
Adore
you.
you,
both.
and thank you
Thank
for
you.
It is an honor, and on your deathbed, you will remember this moment.
These
and
are the
think
moments-
It was all worthwhile.
These are the moments I live for, honestly. I live for these moments, so I can't
Good.
thank you enough. Thank you.
Great pleasure.